Hey, hello. This is yet another webcast. How do we call those things? Live stream on Crossplane. I need to think for a few moments on for knowing which channel I am today. uh, this is Nick. That's Nick, and he's going to talk about the improvements, let's say, that we've been making on Crossplane composites and how we can simplify some of the things, especially related to versioning and updates. Not versioning, upgrades, right?
Yeah. Well, both to some extent, versioning in service of upgrades. So, hey folks, I'm Nick. I am a one-time tech lead of Crossplane, principal architect here at Upbound. And before we get started, I do want to apologize. I have a puppy over here in this little pen. She is currently asleep looking, which is good, but she may wake up and make noise, so I apologize about that.
That's why I have cats. They don't make noise.
So, all right, let's dive right into it. I'm going to assume some familiarity with Crossplane's composition functionality and Crossplane itself. I'm not going to explain too much about that because I know Victor's gone into that in the past, and we've talked about that in the past here as well. So I would recommend, if you're not familiar with composition, definitely check out crossplane.io and have a look at some of our documentation. Or if you have any questions, come hit us up on Slack on slack.crossplane.io. But the general theme is that Crossplane is made up of a bunch of providers. Each provider has many resources that are somehow related. Let's say AWS provider or Google provider or SQL provider that give you what we call managed resources, which are kind of like the building blocks of Crossplane. They're all the little things that you can compose together to represent your infrastructure. But then on top of that, kind of the user interface to Crossplane almost is functionality we call composition, which lets you define your own APIs that happen to be sort of powered by those managed resources. So you can define your, my company widget API, and when someone goes and asks Crossplane, hey, please make me a new my company widget for my team, let's say, make me a new billing database API call. Then Crossplane goes and makes a database behind the scenes or whatever you tell Crossplane to do. The way we set that all up is called composition. There's a couple of moving parts with regards to how composition works. The API type definition is what we would call a composite resource. So your company widget database, when you're calling that API, being like, kubectl make me a new company widget. That's making a REST call of a kind company widget, and that is what we call a composite resource, or an XR for short. But then when Crossplane sees one of those composite resources and it's like, oh, I need to go make a company widget, then it's like, what do I do? What does a company widget really mean? And the way it figures out what to do with the fact that it's been asked for a company widget is uses a type we call a composition. So the feature is called composition. There happens to be an actual API type called a composition as well. So there's also, you can have multiple different sort of compositions for your XR. The reason we do this is you might have a big company widget and a small company widget, or a West Coast and an East Coast company widget. So rather than having to tweak all the individual settings like region and zone or size of database or whatever that you might have between those sort of different sort of classes of company widget, you can just say, look, there's a composition and it's named this. Go pick the big one or pick the small one. Definitely feel free to interrupt me. And so there is a one-to-many relationship between each composition and the XRs that use it today, right? So, to keep with our example, we've defined our XR called company widget. And, there's a lot of teams within our company. And I said, we're probably like SREs, platform teams, something like that, someone offering a platform to their company, to their peers. So let's say I'm the platform team member at Upbound, and I've defined an Upbound widget, which is a really important piece of infrastructure that sort of all of my teams need to use. And let's say I've got several different teams. I've got, let's say, 3 or 4 engineering teams that I support, and each of them needs a couple of Upbound widgets. So each of them have asked for 1 or 2. So let's say there's 10 Upbound widgets. they might have all chosen the composition that represents like the production class Upbound widget. So they've said, give me an Upbound widget, filled in a few fields that are specific to Upbound widget. That's kind of the beauty of Crossplane. You can just have a schema for your API of your definition. And then they say, let's use the big composition. The big composition is kind of like in this case, or any composition, is kind of like a template that says, okay, Crossplane, when someone asks for a big Upbound widget, go do these things. Make an RDS instance and an IAM role, or EKS cluster, or SQL database, just anything that Crossplane supports, basically. Just mix and match these types to like satisfy this request. So one of the big issues that we have today, or one of the shortcomings or gotchas that we have with Crossplane today, is that this one-to-many relationship between a composition and the composite resources that use it as their template means that if you go and change that composition, which is something you can do, let's say the composition kind of has all the defaults for these resources, but we look at the composition every 60 seconds and we say, let's go not recreate necessarily, let's go update all of these resources to match what the composition says. Sort of take the composition, take the inputs from each composite resource, each company widget, each Upbound widget, merge them together and use that to go create a bunch of resources. So if you go and edit that composition, all of Upbound widgets, all 10 or whatever that we've got across the company, owned by different teams, managed by different people, all get updated all at once to reflect that update. And there's usually different personas here. There will often be different personas involved here. So it could be that myself as the SRE or the platform team member, I go and update the composition, and then suddenly all these other teams who actually created their Upbound widget, who don't really know that I've gone and made that edit, get those changes. They're just there, and they're like, oh wow, I guess Nick went and changed the default template because suddenly my database has 100 gig instead of 50 gig or something like that. So that's not ideal for many cases, sort of thing. What we wanted to do was give people the opportunity to sort of both slowly update if they'd like to. So rather than just me as the platform team member being like, hey everyone, new composition's out there, you're all using it, good luck, everything upgrades at once within the next minute. I can say, hey, there's a new composition version available of this, but you don't have to update to it. You can choose basically whether your XR uses this new composition straight away as soon as I push it out there, or you can choose to sort of manually update at your leisure. So that can allow teams a lot more agency in when their infrastructure changes, and it can also allow, just as an organization, you to be a lot more sort of safe and conservative, right? You could always say, let's say each team has 10 of these Upbound widgets. They can update one to the new composition, make sure that works and seems to be okay for them, and then update the other ones later on, sort of thing. General best practice is about rolling out changes effectively, and you can also roll back in this case. So I will say that this was technically possible already, in that you could make a net new composition every time you wanted to do this, but that the UX of that is a little bit weird. Like you would have, start out with your big composition, and then you edit it. You might just or rather leave it there and create a new composition, call it big composition 1, and then change it again, call it big composition 2, etc., etc. Just keep adding more of them, sort of thing. So it was possible to do this with a little bit of awkwardness already, but now we've added something to try and make it a little bit easier or more intuitive. So I'm effectively just going to walk through this process today and demonstrate it. This is I'm not super prepared, bit of a demo, but I see Victor's just popped up. So Victor, do you have a question or a comment?
I heard the word demo, so I thought, okay, so I should start paying attention.
All right. Should we share my screen, Victor, so people can look at
There we are. It's coming.
Terminal output.
Here we are.
Nice.
There we are.
Okay, so where we're at the moment is I've actually just set up a new kind cluster. And on that cluster, I've installed, we haven't actually released this feature yet. This feature will be coming out with Crossplane 1.4, which is due in about a week, I think, or at the end of August. I think August 29th or something. So I'm currently running a development version of Crossplane. And this is actually what happens when you run Crossplane. Most people, run Crossplane to run the help chart or whatever. This is what happens if you run the Crossplane binary itself. And so where I want to start, actually, before I get too much into the feature, one thing that we are doing in the Crossplane project now that we've been meaning to do for a while is, where possible, we want to add new features, especially sort of large new features that have quite a lot of change potentially in them, like this one, as alpha, similar to how the Kubernetes project does this, right? Like they don't just necessarily like turn on a new feature and it's just there for everyone sort of thing. It usually goes through a alpha state where you have to opt in to enable that feature. And you can sort of try it out, but you're kind of aware that it might have some rough edges. It's still new and people are experimenting with it, not production ready yet. Then it graduates to beta, where it's on by default and is much more hardened sort of thing. Or it might not graduate; they might just get rid of it. But if things go well, it'll graduate to beta, and then obviously it'll become a fully fledged feature eventually. So we'd like to take this approach with Crossplane as well. So you will now actually see that if you do basically run Crossplane -- help, you will see at least one currently alpha feature listed, and eventually there'll be beta features as well that you can sort of pass in a flag to turn this functionality on. So all that is to say, composition revisions in Crossplane 1.4 will not be on by default. You will have to opt in to the feature. The code of the feature was fairly carefully written to effectively not change the code path very much if you don't enable this feature flag. So it really just works the same way it always has if this isn't enabled. So I actually don't have this flag running at the moment. Show you what we've got. I believe we have a healthy provider GCP. I'm going to work through a simple GCP example today installed. And then over in last time I was on this live stream, I had just gotten a new mechanical keyboard and I was typoing everything. I'm probably going to jinx myself, but I have a few more weeks practice with it, and I am slightly better than I used to be, let's say. So I did not install this Helm chart with this flag enabled, and I'm just going to cheat, to be honest, and pull the flag.
Normally, this will be a value in the Crossplane chart values file, right?
Yeah.
The
Exactly.
enable composition revision.
Yeah. To be completely transparent, it's actually there already. You can just pass in args. I just was running late and being prepared for this and fumbling to get the command. So I was like, I'll just install it with the command from my history, and then I'll install it later. But you can totally do this. You can totally do this by using your Helm chart. And let's see, we should have a new Crossplane pod starting up. It now has the composition revision support enabled. Yep, there we go. Cool. And actually, you should actually see when you run this. I won't demonstrate it, but if you run it, you'll actually see. Picture is just great content with me just sort of muttering to myself.
Give it 10 more minutes, and I was called fire brigade or something like that. Because you're running this against our production, right?
Right. One thing I'm just trying to do is demonstrate. There you go. That if you look at the logs for the pod, you will be told that there is an alpha feature enabled. So just one little thing that you get there. Anyway, all right. So cool. Composition revisions now are turned on functionality-wise. So now let's go and actually set some stuff up. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm in the Crossplane repo at the moment. Is my path in my terminal. So we've got a bunch of sort of example configurations under here that we use in our documentation. I installed provider GCP before, as you saw. I'm going to install now a XRD, a composite resource definition. So this is going to add support for a composite resource that is a PostgreSQL instance. So this is going to be a very simple example of that's my go-to basically. the abstract resource, sort of the abstraction that we're offering just is a Postgres instance generally. And then we have a couple of different compositions for this Postgres instance that are actually for most of the big clouds. So we have like a Google-based composition and an Amazon-based composition and an Azure-based composition. So you can sort of pick and choose. You can use the Google one today just because it spins up relatively quickly and it's relatively simple, the Google composition for this particular example. I'll show you right now. Just creates a composite Postgres, sorry, just creates a Cloud SQL instance, just one resource. So if you haven't seen a composition before, it's kind of what it looks like basically. It's really just sort of a list of resources that Crossplane should go create. So this is basically saying, if a user creates a composite PostgreSQL instance, Crossplane, you should go create a Cloud SQL instance, and you should have these default settings. And then you can also basically take things from the schema of this guy when it's created and sort of map them over the top to influence those default settings. So this is kind of what I was saying. Like, let's say you've got here the tier is like the I guess the size of this the machine that powers this database, right? If today if without composition revisions, if I had applied this composition and there was a bunch of Postgres instances out there and they were all using this composition, and if I edited this and said, okay, be custom to whatever another valid value is, instantly every resource that used this, or actually within the next 60 seconds, every resource that used this would be like, oh, my composition changed. I need to go and use a bigger tier of machine or whatever change was there, which, again, is just not ideal. You don't necessarily want your whole fleet to just make a big change all at once without any sort of controls over that. So that composition. So we've created a composite resource definition, which you can see there. That looks like it's good to go. Created our composition, which looks like it's good to go as well. And so the new part here is that we now get a composition revision. So whenever you create a composition, or wherever you update and edit a composition, Crossplane will automatically make a revision. So you can basically see that this one is its name is derived from the composite revision composition you want to use. And I think it'll say revision 1, current true. Now these are kind of interesting. The revision is just a number that goes up every time there's a new unique version of a composition. So I'm actually gonna edit this composition now. And under settings, actually, forgive me, I'm going to go to, in a tab that you can't see, I'm going to go to doc.crds.dev, which is a great service that Dan Mango wrote. I'm just going to double check. I think there's a flag here I can turn on called storage auto resize true. But I'm just going to double check that so that I don't miss anything. Yep, here it is. All right. Under settings here, I can go storage. So I'm running kubectl edit on this composition right now. So I'm changing the composition that happens to exist in the API server by adding a new field. So previously we just were not opinionated about this storage auto resize field. I'm guessing the default is probably off. Now we're saying, oh, I've decided that from now on, I as the platform administrator think that this should be on. So, then you should now see that there's 2 composition revisions. So what's happened is we've got a second one, which is number 2. And the other field that's interesting here is current. So current basically says which of these ones matches the current state of the composition. So if anyone's dug deep into how packages work in Crossplane before, you'll know that there are some similar concepts there. When you actually edit a package or when a new version of a package is pushed, we'll go create a package revision, which would actually be a provider revision, because we have two types of packages, providers and configurations. So that would either be a provider revision or a configuration revision. So this is quite similar, but there are some differences. There's the key difference is that when you've got like, let's say, a Crossplane provider, and there's different revisions of the provider to represent like provider GCP version 17, provider GCP version 18, etc., etc. You only ever have one of those active or installed at one point, sort of thing, across your whole Crossplane cluster. Whereas that's not true for composition revisions, right? Because there could be 3 different composite resources, and each of them could be at a different revision. So rather than say this is the active revision, because multiple different active revisions at any one time, we just let you know which one's current, basically, which one matches the current state of the composition. And part of the reason we do that is because you might have seen that the revision number went up when I edited that composition. But if I edit that composition again, and find that, figure out how to use Vim, and I get rid of that storage order resize field. So what I'm doing is actually just removing the field that I just added. So this composition is actually about to revert back to the state that it originally was. You'll now see we didn't actually create a new composition revision. We actually just, because we just reverted back to a previous state effectively. But what we have done is, you can see here that before I just made that edit, the current revision rather was revision 2. And now that I reverted back to the old state, the current revision is revision 1. So that just lets folks know when they're kind of like browsing for a composition revision to pick which one they want to use. They can see, the history, when they were made, what order they were made in, and which one is currently the sort of recommended one, effectively, or the most up-to-date one that matches the composition that we have.
Let me interrupt you for a second, Nick. Eve, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, has a question you might want to address now or later. Your choice.
Sure. So what would I do if I made a mistake in my composition bases? That is a good question. So with regard to revisions, Crossplane would just faithfully recreate what you did effectively. So if you had made a mistake, there would be a revision produced that had that mistake. But the nice thing here is that today, if you made a mistake in your composition without this revision functionality, before Crossplane 1.4, every XR would just basically stop being able to update. They'd say, this resource that you made a mistake in just is nonsensical to me. I don't know how to parse it, so I'm just going to sort of stop updating that one. That sometimes could be safe. So in some cases, let's say it doesn't really matter that change didn't happen. It's not ideal, because obviously you wanted to change something, but it doesn't literally break the resource. Then that could just work fairly fine. And if you were to go and look at the sort of events relating to your composite resource, it would be telling you every time it reconciled, it'd be like, hey, your Cloud SQL instance, you added a field that was typoed or something like that. I can't make this update, so I'm just not going to do it. But that can be bad as well, right? Let's say you actually edit 2 or 3 things, and those edits all need to go through for it to be a healthy composition of resources. Then that could be bad. That could break your composite resource, because it could update a couple of things but not other ones, and then you just end up with non-functional infrastructure. So the nice thing that this helps here with revisions is that if folks use the sort of more conservative approach, which I'll show you in a second, of saying, don't update me to the latest revision automatically, let me choose when to get the latest revision, then you can do a slower rollout of this, right? Again, if you've got 10 of these Postgres instances out there, you could choose to just do 1, and then you might be like, oh, I did that one and it broke, so I'm not going to do the other 9, sort of thing. You can treat it like a canary effectively. But there's something that is unrelated to revisions specifically that I think is a really better way to address your sort of potential problem, is that we have a lot of ideas that we haven't just had time to build yet, that about automatically validating changes to compositions. So there's a lot of linting that we could do that we don't do today, where just if you would go and make a change, we could just tell you, hey, you told me to set blob field on this resource, and that field doesn't exist, or you type it, or you gave it a string value when it expected it in, because we have the schema for all these. And that's a big advantage over something like Helm. Let's say with Helm templates, we have a fully schemified open API document. We know what to expect your composition could be made up of, and we get to lean on all the API servers, webhooks, and validation, and all the great tooling there. So, coming soonish when we get time to build that validation, but that can also just basically prevent you from being able to make a mistake in the first place, or do a lot to prevent that from happening.
Another one, Nick, from Ovidio. I'm not sure whether I'm pronouncing that one either. Is there a way to limit the history limit for compositions?
There is not, but that could be a feature that we want. So on our other revisions, package revisions, and or rather configuration and provider revisions, there is a history limit. With this being an alpha feature coming in for the first time, I was really curious to see basically how much need there would be for that. So we don't necessarily make an unbounded amount of revisions. As you saw, if you change to a previous state, then it doesn't create any revision. So there are some sort of, if you somehow ended up with a revision flapping back and forth between two different states, it wouldn't just go and make an unlimited amount. There is a common practice with revision things in Kubernetes of having I forget what the pattern of the configuration is usually called, but it does sort of say limited to only being 10 or something like that. The tricky thing that we would find is because multiple of them can be active all at once, there was a question of okay, what if you say there can only be 10 revisions of this composition, but there are some XRs using the oldest one, the 10th one? Do we break those XRs, or do we say, sorry, we can't clean it up, sort of thing? There is some tricky stuff to do there. So I'm kind of waiting and seeing whether this is a real problem. Compositions I'd be curious to see how often compositions got edited in practice. I don't necessarily think it's really an everyday thing. So I'd be really surprised if, let's say there were hundreds of revisions of a composition, and if there were hundreds of revisions, I would imagine that would be over months and months. And I kind of feel like just manual cleanup might be the safest way to do it, but definitely not saying that there won't ever be a limit. We're just sort of waiting to learn more about sort of how this feature is used before we build it in. As I say, it's alpha at the moment, so we've got a lot of room to add to it and add just sort of functionalities and features as we get feedback from the community. So Victor,
that's it with questions. So back to your screen.
Okay, so what I'm going to demonstrate now is actually just using this. So we've got these two compositions, revisions rather, and as we said, let's see. Currently, I'll refresh my memory. The first revision is the current one. So let's see. And GCP there already. So in Crossplane, you can install a thing like we call a configuration that actually sets all this up for you. But pardon me, I didn't prepare one of those for this this demo, so I'm doing things a little bit sort of the manual way. Double checking that I have everything I need. So I've created a provider config for a couple of provider configs for GCP. So I've got all my credentials set up. I've got my GCP provider set up. As we said before, I've got my XRD and I've got my two compositions. So we're kind of ready. We've got all the plumbing in place that the sort of platform team would set up. Now I can sort of switch persona and pretend to be sort of a customer of the platform team, like a developer who's like, I'm now just consuming this API that the platform team has made for me. I just want a database. So going to create go create one of these. So this is just, this is basically the API that the platform team has defined. This is how, Crossplane works today. This is kind of what I was getting at before. In this case, there's a couple of parameters that are specific to this resource that the platform team thinks that I, as an app team user, should be able to tweak, like in this case, the storage database. But then all of those other settings, like the tier and the storage order resize and the stuff that we just saw is sort of in that class of service, in that composition. And a great way to sort of pick compositions is to use labels to describe them. That way you could be like, pick me the East Coast big GCP, give a bunch of sort of words that define what you want. Very much like a pod selecting a node in Kubernetes, effectively. I need a big node that's on the West Coast or whatever. This is the same thing for your infrastructure. I need a big database that's, GCP. In this case, we're just saying, give me the GCP one. We're going to go create that. That flag. There we go. That should be creating it. I expect there to be one managed resource spinning up. Yep, there we go, a Cloud SQL instance, which looks like it's, takes a little while to create. So one of the interesting things here is we've now created this. Now created this PostgreSQL instance. You can see that there's something new here if you're intimately familiar with all of this, which I know some people might not be, but you can see we pointed out before the composition selector, right? So the composition selector is sort of matches on a bunch of keywords or labels basically to Crossplane to say go pick the GCP one. And we can see, okay, so it found a composition that had the labels provider GCP, and that composition was named was this composition ref that says composite PostgreSQL instances, yada yada yada. And now when this alpha feature is enabled, in addition to the composition ref, you will get a composition revision ref. You can see that this one's using FC9 and 9. And if we those, we should see FC9 N9 is the current one, current revision. So actually, even with composition revisions turned on, by default, there is no behavior change in Crossplane from what there was before. By default, when you update a composition, we'll notice and we'll make that change. So you can see that storage auto resize is turned on the, this is me being a little bit confused. I was like, I removed that field. Why is that turned on the Cloud SQL instance? That's because it is the default value. So I think that it's just been late initialized by the cloud provider, which basically means we go and say, hey, cloud provider, we don't really have an opinion about this field. It's just not there. And then Google says, all right, cool, we created it and we've set that value for you. So what I want to demonstrate now is that we picked this FC9 and 9 revision, but if I go and edit that composition again, and let's say I set storage auto resize to false, now have a third revision. That's a new state for this composition, and that one is current. That matches the current state of the composition. And let's see, this guy is MGZGW. Could take a little bit of time for this one to update. We're still on FC9 and 9 on this one. So this
Maybe it would be useful I don't know whether that's doable, easy, but to have revision number also in the resources that are managed by that, resources that are managed by that composition.
Do you mean?
I mean both composition composition resources.
So you mean that field that I was just looking at there to have it tell you what version it's using?
Yeah, kind of the same one, maybe in in a get command, not only in the description.
Yeah. I think that is a good idea. One thing we actually considered was just putting the revision number in the actual name of the resource, which honestly would be a good idea. The only reason we didn't do that is because we already have other revisions, the package revisions, where we didn't do that. So we were trying to sort of keep it similar with that. But I could see us adding, let's say, a status field or something to the composite resource that tells you what revision number you're currently using, and maybe like whether that's current or not. So having a bit of a heart attack there. I was like, hey, this should all automatically update, and then it didn't. A little bit of propagation delay, but we are now on the latest one, so it has automatically stepped up to the latest composition, which is MGZGW, which you can see here is the current one. So that just moved over from it was originally on FC9N9, and then moved to MZGW. So it's just let's check whether that Cloud SQL instance came up. It did. So I'm just going to demonstrate the other option here, which is to have a manual composition update policy. And because I'm lazy and don't want to type that out, I'm just going to try and copy that into my buffer here. And then I will delete that claim. So we'll see now that there is the composite resource is gone. Our Cloud SQL instance should be gone. So we're all cleaned up. All of our infrastructure has just gone away when I deleted that. So now I'm going to keep the same composition selector, but because I'm feeling a bit more conservative, I'm going to say, instead of having an automatic update policy, instead of basically always following whatever the latest composition is, I'm going to say I want this to be manual. Then I'm just going to apply that again. And all that good stuff should be happening again. We should have a Cloud SQL instance spinning up. We should have composite PostgreSQL instance spinning up. From day to day, I see all these people with like convenient shortcuts for like kubectl and things like that in their terminal. And I'm always like, I don't need that. I'm fine just typing things out. And then I'm on a live stream and I'm like, oh, I really wish I had convenient little shortcuts for all of these things. So just looking at our composite resource and grepping for some interesting keywords, we can see that we picked MGZGW, which is what I would have expected. And we also have, which is the current revision. And let's see, you can also see that our composition update policy is manual, as I just said. So now, effectively, we will edit our composition again. I feel a little bit bad picking on this storage auto resize field. I'm just in my other tab that you can't see, going over to a different tab and seeing if there's like some other interesting field I can change here. I'm going to enable, I don't know what this feature does. I'm a great SRE. I'm going to enable crash safe. I can guess what it does based on its. But crash safe replication.
I never tried that one.
And there you go. Now we have crash safe replication on the latest version of this composition, which has become revision 4, and that is now current. But what we should see, and this is a little bit hard to sort of really demonstrate because there was a little bit of replication lag previously, but we should see that if we look at this resource is just going to stick with MGZGW. Basically, it's not going to upgrade to that 4th new current revision until someone tells it to. And effectively, the way you would tell it to is really just as simple as editing a resource. You would say, okay, look at the composition revisions, and I see that there's this 4th one that's current, and I'm going to take that, and I'm going to just I really regret naming the thing that we use for demos all the time, composite PostgreSQL instance. It is a lot to type. Now, because I'm using the manual update policy, when I want to use a new composition revision ref, I just type that, point it to the new one, get rid of the old one, update it, and then that's it. We should presumably see, again, potentially after a little bit of replication delay, we should presumably see this guy getting updated to use all of the settings that we just set. There you go. So you can see that my Cloud SQL instance now has crash safe replication enabled. It's much safer than it previously was. So that's kind of effectively a walkthrough of the new feature. That's really what there is. You know, I was just thinking while I was going through that process of manually updating, maybe a cool thing to do that we could probably do with annotations or something already would be to offer a way to let the platform team annotate the new composition revisions to sort of tell you what changed. So as a user, you don't just see, oh, there's 4 available now instead of 5. You can get a quick update of like oh, I see that they just enabled storage revision or whatever, some kind of version change log. One thing I've considered is that you could build maybe like a diff tool or something like that, so you could sort of have a almost like a Terraform plan here, right? You could effectively say, kubectl Crossplane or whatever, show me what would happen to my infrastructure if I changed the latest revision, and it could say I'm actually going to set this field and unset that field, so you can sort of understand what's about to happen before you go do it.
There are a couple of questions, but before I put them on the screen, I have one huge one.
Sure.
When are you going to order those revisions by the revision number?
That is an excellent question. I actually don't know if you have. I noticed that. Yeah, I noticed that myself the other day. So that would be something that we'd have to do to, I guess, teach kubectl that the revision printer column was how they should be ordered. I absolutely think we should, to be honest. I'm not sure if we can. I believe one way to do it would be to take the approach we were thinking of before, of sort of between the name at the moment of the actual resource is just the name of the composition with a little random suffix. We could put the number 1 in there or something. And we really went back and forth on this. Like I said, it was just because we were like, it'd be weird for us to do it on this one when we don't do it on all the other revisions we have, and that would be a breaking change for the other revisions, I think. So,
True. But I can imagine myself reaching 20 revisions and beyond would drive me nuts.
Yeah.
I would go crazy.
Well, I strongly recommend raising an issue against Crossplane for this. I do agree. And again, this is something that is really nice about this ability to introduce features as alpha, right? It really lets us get people with their hands on these features and get this kind of feedback without having to worry too much about, is it perfect first? Because we have, in Crossplane, as with anything in the Kubernetes ecosystem, we have a much looser contract on change for alpha resources. So, just one thing to keep in mind before everyone goes and puts this flag on and starts using it. There is no contract for breaking API changes for alpha features, which means we could just delete this in the next release. We could make it so that you have to manually go update your CRDs. We basically, by opting into this feature while it's alpha, we would love you to if you can tolerate that, but we don't recommend opting into it in production just yet because we might break it on the next release. So just be aware of that. But again, the nice thing is that we can get it out there right now, ship it, get feedback from people, and then change it based on that feedback before it becomes beta and before it becomes on by default. So ironically, if you're a conservative user of Crossplane who likes the look of this new feature that lets you be even more conservative, maybe wait for a while before you turn it on.
Okay, so here's for Jared. Do users interact directly with composition revisions, or do they only interact with composition objects and composition revisions are automatically controlled?
Yeah, effectively, the latter, so they're automatically controlled. But I think to dig in a little bit more, I guess it depends what you mean by interact. If you look at what we just did there, we edited the composition. So we mutate. We users, platform teams, really the folks configuring Crossplane, they interact with compositions in that they edit them. But then there's a kind of another interaction style as well, which is choosing which one you use, right? Like editing your XR, I guess, to pick a new composition revision. So as we kind of saw, if you have the manual mode turned on, then kind of you interact with revisions by editing your XRs, editing, in our case, our Postgres instance to say, use the new revision. This is a really interesting thing with CRDs, actually. You should treat treat any of Crossplane revisions, be they basically anything with revision in the name, so be they a configuration revision, package revision, or composition revision, you should treat them as immutable. You should mutate the parent of that thing, like the provider package or the composition, and Crossplane takes care of making these things. Unfortunately, Kubernetes doesn't actually give us any way to make these immutable. Actually, I guess theoretically we could go write a webhook that would reject all updates to it, which is probably what we should do. But for the time being, there's a lot of documentation on these resources that say, hey, this is immutable, don't change it. So, we're relying on people noticing that and not editing them. They're not intended to be changed.
From Eve, when debugging, do we need to groom all composition components?
I'm not sure,
I'm not sure.
how to interpret that. I will say, but I can take a guess. So if you're sort of saying there's a Postgres instance, which is the composite resource, and then that's made up of a Cloud SQL instance and made up of all these other things, the key debugging sort of information that we give you is as a Crossplane user, is just maybe not the person running the Crossplane cluster and all that kind of thing, but the person who is actually just consuming this infrastructure. We make Kubernetes events, so you can do a describe, and it might be a little hard to see on this terminal window, but you can see there's all these informations like we selected a composition, we composed some resources, we published a connection secret, and they're all normal. If we couldn't compose resources, let's say, because as I think you asked before, Eve, if you sort of made a bad edit to a composition that had a typo or something, we would give you a warning event and we'd tell you what you did wrong here. And this is something that's been a little unintuitive to folks. All of these warnings are scoped to the resource that sort of notices them. So what that means is if your composite resource, your sort of abstraction makes a change that it breaks the Postgres instance, we show you that makes the Cloud SQL instance, the under the hood, behind the scenes thing. We give that error on that, and we don't bubble that error up all the way to the abstracted resource. And this is kind of an interesting sort of kind of a design or philosophical thing, because it would be really nice to aggregate those errors on the sort of parent resource. It's just kind of that's not the way that things typically are done in Kubernetes, right? Let's say if you break a pod, or rather, if you edit your deployment and you give settings to your deployment that like make it not able to run a pod anymore, typically what will happen is the deployment will just say, hey, I have 0 out of 3 pods ready, or less than all of my pods are healthy right now, and that's all the information you get at the deployment level. It doesn't tell you specifically what's wrong with the pod, and then you've got to go dig a little bit deeper and go look at those pods, and the pods will be like, oh, I can't, I'm in a crash loop, back off, or whatever sort of thing. So Crossplane does the same kind of thing. It will tell you, hey, your Postgres instance is not healthy. I can't, for whatever reason, like the Postgres instance is not healthy. And then you kind of have to follow, there's references between them, the resources that you can go inspect, and it'll say, hey, my Cloud SQL instance is named this. Then you can go look at that Cloud SQL instance and be like, oh, I've got the information from that. So this is the idiomatic way to do it in the Kubernetes ecosystem. It definitely is a lot easier to do if you're like using something like Upbound Cloud, where you've got like a nice web UI where you can just easily click on the composed resources and sort of see the events there. It's a little bit kind of messier to do in the Kubernetes, by kubectl, to be completely honest, but is what it is.
But the good thing I believe from that is the more we do things the way how Kubernetes expects them to be, in a way, even if that's not the best solution, the more all those tools can communicate and cooperate with anybody, all the other tools that expect all those things, right?
Yeah.
I can imagine that many users will be shipping all that information to CloudWatch or whatever, Locky, whatever they're using, and those tools tend to expect certain things from every tool simply because it's in Kubernetes.
Yeah, it's a really interesting problem that we face a lot in Crossplane, right? Because we're standing on the shoulders of giants by building on top of the Kubernetes ecosystem, where we try to be good citizens and sort of do things the idiomatic Kubernetes way, right? In a way where we're extending it to sort of do even more that Kubernetes was originally meant to do. But so for that reason, we have a bunch of folks come to Crossplane, and probably the majority of folks come to Crossplane having used Kubernetes. And then it makes sense for Crossplane to work the way that Kubernetes would work there, right? Because they know they've experience with this system and this ecosystem, and they kind of have expectations. But then, sometimes we don't necessarily agree with the way Kubernetes works, and sometimes people are coming to Crossplane and they haven't used, they like Crossplane for Crossplane just as they like the idea of a sort of a cloud control plane for everything, even though they haven't historically been big on Kubernetes or whatever. And it's kind of a harder sell to be like, sorry, like we kind of agree that it should work this way, but we're building on top of a thing that doesn't work that way. So there's value to consistency sometimes, but definitely a big philosophical trade-off.
2 more, unless more pop up. Another one from me: would be nice to have metrics. I will give a quick answer. There are metrics. You might want to go deeper. Probably it's more into discussion whether metrics are sufficient that we are exposing, but Crossplane is exposing them, right?
Yeah,
at least to Prometheus, as far as I know.
Yeah, port 8080 on any Crossplane provider or Crossplane itself, or basically any component of Crossplane, has some rudimentary metrics. They basically are just like, how many times have we done a thing, reconciled a thing, and did it work or did it not? Absolutely would like to expand them. We've been in a holding pattern for a while because we'd like to use OpenTelemetry instrumentation, but we build on top of controller runtime, which hasn't yet updated to use OpenTelemetry. So I was actually just talking to the head of the observability tag CNCF the other day, and sort of just saying that we should probably just stop waiting for controller runtime and go port to OTel. The other thing you can do that is probably even more useful is there are actually a bunch of exporters for Prometheus that will take events and use them to make you can either just plug them into like a logging pipeline or something if you want to, or you can derive metrics from them. And so that is a really great way to get really useful information. Just set up like an event exporter to Prometheus and count the amount of times you see an error on a particular resource or something.
There is actually a follow-up question. I misunderstood the initial one, and I think that this is a good one, right? Like how many resources are on the same revision, so it's safe to delete the old revision, or I guess do anything else. That would indeed be interesting. I'm guessing it's alpha, so it's not there, but sounds like something useful.
Yeah, that is probably something that we should do. We have it's a little tricky to build, actually. I mean, it's not that hard, but it's not the simplest thing to build. The closest analog we actually have already is the provider config. So if I've got one here. actually describing. I'm just going to get it in YAML. It might be a bit smaller. There we go. You could actually see that this provider config is how we configure a provider in Kubernetes. In this case, it's like it's a GCP one, so it tells you the project ID and the secret that has the credentials that Crossplane should use. You can have multiple of these, and so we currently have that one. SQL instance up there, and that Cloud SQL instance I happen to know is using this, and you can see status users 1. So we actually have a count of like how many folks are using that provider config, which is just useful informationally so that you can know not to delete that provider config if someone's still using it. And it also actually blocks deletion of the provider config, because in this case we need that to be able to reconcile this Cloud SQL instance. So we'll effectively go into a condition where we're like, yeah, this provider config, we understand you've asked for it to be deleted. We're going to wait until all the consumers are gone before we delete it. So we could do that with composition provisions as well. That might be a good idea.
And the last one from Jared. Do composition revisions rely on ordering of resources within the composition to stay the same? Like if a revision 1 had 2 buckets and revision 2 switched to the order of them?
That would be okay, like as in that would be allowed. It wouldn't break anything. It would probably create a new revision. So scratching the surface, pardon me a little bit, is the way that we there's probably a much better way to do this, but right now the way that we figure out whether something is a net new revision is we render the spec as YAML and then hash that YAML. So basically, if you just make ordering changes that don't have any effect on anything, you'll get a new composition revision. It'll be functionally the same as the old one, but Crossplane won't know it's the same because they look like different hashes effectively. We can probably improve that hashing to not be rendering as YAML and all that kind of stuff. We could probably do that in a much better way, so that Crossplane then would just notice that, oh yeah, these are effectively the same. Nothing changed apart from ordering, so I won't make a new one. Although I'm not sure. I feel like sometimes when you submit to the API server, I think it kind of reorders things. So it's possible that it works just fine today. I'm not sure, Jared. Long story short.
I think that's the last of the questions, and we are on the top of the hour. The only thing I would say before we leave, for those still watching, all those questions, I mean, kind of doubt, hey, should we add this, should we add that? If they're put as issues in the repo, that helps a lot, right? Because then we can continue the discussion, track it down, and all those things. So.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to chat, I'll be on Crossplane Slack after this, so I'll be happy to just talk about things. But if you've got something that you strongly believe already, like it absolutely needs this feature, or you feel pretty confident about it, definitely raise an issue. GitHub.com/crossplane/crossplane. Please do fill out a feature request, and we'd love to hear it.
That's it. Top of the hour. Do you remember before we started streaming, you said, I believe this is going to be 10 minutes?
I know. I just fumbled my typing a lot to stretch it out.
So are you also the one who is estimating the work for the team? Just I want to get an idea how wrong you are in general.
When estimating the work for the team, I'm very good at padding. Very, very good at saying, oh, no, this will take 10 years.
Now I know why they love you. Okay. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everybody. See you next week. We don't know what it's going to be about, but it's going to be interesting.